This week's edition of NJBIA's Minding Your Business is brought to you in part by AT&T, helping family, friends, and neighbors connect in meaningful ways every day. From the first phone call 140 years ago to mobile video streaming today, AT&T innovates to improve lives. New Jersey's community colleges aligning education to build an innovative workforce. Find out how your business can join and benefit at njpathways.org. And by New Jersey Business Magazine, providing the critical information needs for New Jersey's business community for more than 65 years.
Welcome to NJBIA's Minding Your Business. I'm Bob Considine. Well, NJBIA recently released its 64th Annual Business Outlook Survey detailing the great affordability and inflationary challenges facing New Jersey businesses. Here to discuss some of those findings is NJBIA Chief Government Affairs Officer Christopher Emigholz. Chris, thank you so much for being back on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Bob.
And I should mention, this is the first time you've been on the show since you've been promoted to Chief of Government Affairs Officer. So congratulations to you on that.
Thank you.
I should tell you also that we had ordered a crown and a red carpet for your arrival here today. It just didn't show up.
That's the chief uniform?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Nice. That'll be an honor.
All right. So 64th Annual Business Outlook Survey by NJBIA released just a few days ago. A few statistics I'd like to go over with you today. A large majority, 75%, said Governor Murphy and lawmakers have not done enough to address business affordability in the past 12 months, compared to 5% who said policymakers are doing enough. Further, a combined 82% said New Jersey is either somewhat unaffordable for business or not affordable at all for business. So Chris, you have to work with the legislature every day. What kind of message can they take from this? And will they even register, I guess, is what I'd like to find out.
I guess, Bob, there's a sense of frustration out there that you go back a year ago, coming off the somewhat surprising results of that election in 2021, and a lot of the legislators said, hey, this was closer. The majority party in Trenton, the Democrats, said this was closer than we expected. Right. We need to focus on affordability, kind of kitchen table kind of pocketbook issues to make sure that the regular person out there knows that we're doing stuff to make their life easier. And you've seen some efforts in Trenton on that. The frustrating thing is whether it's the Anchor program that's trying to help people with property taxes, specifically excludes business. Right. And business affordability needs to be on that table. It needs to be one of those affordability options that we're looking at, because if you leave out business affordability, then we're not really focusing on creating jobs. We're not really focusing on creating economic growth. Right. And we need to. That's part of why we worry about affordability, is because it hurts the economy. Yeah, and it was word out of, obviously, there was no relief for unemployment insurance with the $1 billion tax. And the Anchor tax program you mentioned, businesses also paying, what, nearly half the businesses pay about half the property taxes in the state, and property taxes make up about half the taxes businesses pay. So it's a major burden for businesses. Right. New Jersey has the highest property taxes in the nation by a considerable margin, and yet here's the major property tax relief item that the state is initiating. Good for the state for doing something. We need to do more, yet it's specifically saying not for business. Yeah,
it's interesting. On the subject of taxes, businesses were also asked in the survey, they were asked how to improve business affordability on the very same subject. The leading responses called for a reduction in corporate business taxes, with 19%, and then income taxes 17%, and then property taxes. So taxes is the big word of the day.
Taxes.
I was a little surprised about corporate business taxes, because I know many of the respondents in the survey are small business, but CBT was a big one. So where are we now with the CBT? I know New Jersey has the highest in the nation, correct?
So, and your point about being surprising, I think, is a very good one. But I think people, especially our members, the businesses themselves, whether it's small businesses that are pass-through entities that pay taxes, their income taxes, property taxes are your biggest burden, they're at least aware enough, astute enough to understand that if our large businesses are doing well, the corporations, then it's a big deal for them. Right. Also, corporations, one thing, BIA is disproportionately so manufacturing based. Yeah. And we started out as New Jersey manufacturers over 110 years ago. Yep. And manufacturers are mostly registered as corporations. A lot of manufacturers are older companies that used to be the more predominant way to register your business. Sure. Now it's becoming more S-corps, pass-through corporations, LLCs, partnerships. So they're paying through the income taxes, but the corporate business tax is a big deal to them. The other part that makes it jump out is why property taxes shows up high. Corporate business taxes, I said property taxes were the highest in the nation. CBT, the corporate business tax, we're number one in the nation.
Right.
And number one in the nation, again, by a significant amount.
It's 11.5%.
11.5% exactly. And there's no other state in the nation that has a double-digit corporate tax rate. We are at 11.5. Sad thing, frustratingly so, but good for Pennsylvania, is number two is Pennsylvania at 9.99. Right. But they just enacted a bipartisan plan proposed by their Democrat governor, supported by the Republican legislature, to take that 9.99 and over the years phase it down to 4.99, cut it in half.
Right.
And New Jersey, we were desperately hoping that the 11.5 falls down to 9. And why are we hoping for that? The end of 2023, so a little more than a year from now, we are expecting, per statute, the corporate business tax surtax, which brought us to 11.5 to sunset back to 9.
And what is that? It was 2.5%, right?
Yeah, 2.5%. So 9 will still be high, but it won't make us the significant outlier that we are right now at 11.5. We don't want 9. 9's not good enough,
Right.
but I think a great first step to show that business affordability matters is to let this corporate tax go from 11.5 to 9 next year. And all you have to do is nothing.
Right.
We're not asking for them to pass a bill. We're not asking for anything else. We're just saying, don't extend that surtax. And the reason why we're a little worried and concerned about it is this goes back to 2018 when they created the surtax. It was supposed to go away by now.
Right.
At the beginning of the pandemic, when there was so much uncertainty about what would happen with revenues, they decided to extend it to December 31st, 2023. So now we're at that point where, and that seems far from now, a year, but the first decision point with that is the governor's budget address, which is only a few months from now, the end of February, at the beginning of next year. So that budget address, hopefully, there's an announcement that we're going to let it sunset, or at least the budget revenues are based upon letting it sunset. So that'll be the first decision point for the state to say, you know what, we're going to let the sunset because we realize it needs to be sunsetted. We got to get rid of us being an outlier on the corporate tax.
Do you have a gut on this? I mean, it's been extended. Do you think it will sunset at the very least?
The good news is we continue to hear from people, whether it's just in conversations with policymakers in New Jersey, that, hey, right now, every indication is that we can let the sunset. Or we've heard publicly at BIA's recent public policy forum, we heard Chairman Sarlo, the senator from Bergen County, who is the chairman of the budget committee. He publicly said we need to let this sunset. And I think that was great news because any bill that's going to extend it has to go through his budget committee. Now, Chairman Sarlo has always been a great fan and pro-business legislator. We've always worked closely with him, and he has the right business mindset. But hopefully him kind of coming out and stamping that this has to go away is important and is a good sign for the rest of the legislature to follow.
And we'll have some of the public policy forum, that discussion right after your segment here today. I wanted to turn to some national factors at play. Inflation, big subject in this survey. A whopping 93% of respondents said they were substantially impacted or moderately impacted by inflation in 2022. As for specific costs, you can see combined 93% describe themselves as substantially or moderately impacted by higher prices of supplies and materials. Another 90% said they were substantially or moderately impacted by increased fuel costs, and 85% impacted by higher labor costs. So Chris, understanding that the legislature may be very limited in what they can do about inflation, does this not send some kind of message to the governor and the legislature that, this is going on here, so you can't add extra costs for business?
You can't exacerbate it.
Exactly.
And I would say, it's certainly when you recount those numbers, those stats, it's not Governor Murphy's fault. It's not our legislature's fault. This is a national, even international phenomenon going on that's certainly out of New Jersey policymakers' control. But I hope they're aware of this when they're making policy, because what this says, and you saw this in some of the Business Outlook survey numbers, that businesses are more worried about next year than they've been in some recent years. A lot of times there's optimism, sometimes there's pessimism. I would say the pessimism for next year is higher than it was last year. And then rightfully so, because of inflation, because of supply chain, because of the workforce shortages, because of just that high tax, high cost environment that we're in. So you have all this going on. I think legislators should step back and say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't do this bill that will make business more costly. Maybe we shouldn't increase taxes. Maybe we should take seriously any calls for tax cutting, such as our unemployment insurance fund, such as letting the CBT surtax expire, such as looking at R&D tax credits, angel investor tax credits, anything we can do to lower the cost of doing business. I think now's the time to do it, and especially because we're in a better budget position now than we've been in years.
Yeah, sure.
We're not used to having extra cash. We're not used to having a large surplus. And so we've been seeing that the past few budgets have been easier than historic in New Jersey. So I think now's the time when we don't know what's coming around the corner. We know that businesses are worried about what's coming around the corner. Let's focus on relief right now.
Right. A couple of more related items in the Business Outlook survey related to inflation. When asked if they anticipated needing to reduce staff if inflation remains the same or worsens over the next 12 months, most of them said they weren't sure, 36%. 35% said they would not need to reduce staff, but 29% said they would. So at this juncture, it would seem layoffs would be uncertain if things continued along this path. But that uncertainty may be related to staffing challenges as it is. Another data point from the survey, some 70% of respondents said they were challenged to find appropriate staffing in 2022. And this is only a 3% improvement from last year when many workers were taking advantage of extended unemployment benefits. So I was asking, what do you make of this, particularly with staffing? We're now a few years out of the pandemic. Is this something that's never going to change, or is it going to improve at some point?
No, that's the million-dollar question. And I think everybody's wrestling with this change, and it's been more than an evolution, just the revolution, the sea change that we saw in the nature of work, whether it's the remote workforce and people working from home, what that impact has, whether it is the impact on childcare, impact on education, all of those things. And then we've always had behind the scenes, that's only been exacerbated, is certain more technical industries have always struggled to find people with these technical skills.
Right.
And so I think all of this has come together where I think you're probably seeing some permanent changes, but everything is so uncertain. This is unprecedented. We don't know what's going to happen.
It's your favorite word, right?
Well, I think since the pandemic, I mean, the impact on so many parts of our lives we've never seen before. And so it's hard to take something that we've never seen before and say, I know what's going to happen next. So anybody that knows for sure what's happening with the remote workforce, with labor participation rates, with unemployment, like, well, then you know what? I'm going to sell you a bridge.
Right. We got about a minute left, Chris. So I wanted to turn to the topic of overregulation in New Jersey. I found this statistic particularly interesting. Only 14% said they believe New Jersey has made progress over the last year in easing regulatory obstacles. And that number in 2017 was 24%. So it's gone down 10%, and it was never great to begin with. Do you think this is something the legislature does have an ability to help? Do you think the appetite or the will is there?
I worry about that. I worry about the conflicting priorities. What is clear to me is, as most people say, we support small businesses and we want to have an innovation economy. We want to get back to growing that innovation economy in Jersey. And I think two things that come out that are pretty clear is the small businesses struggle with the overregulation more than the large businesses. And that makes sense because they don't have compliance offices, HR offices, the same kind of resources that the bigger folks do. And innovation, a lot of times it's those little startups that start creating jobs. And what we all want to see is jobs being created in New Jersey. And the jobs often come from the little guys, especially the little guys in the innovation economy, and they start growing. And they might make, if you go from 2 jobs to 4 jobs, that's a doubling of your workforce.
Right.
And you don't get those percentages when you have 1,000 people or 10,000 people. So you need to get big growth in jobs, you need to have those little guys. And the best way to do that is get off the back of the little guys and let them innovate, let them create, let them do what they want to do, which is coming up with a new drug, a new medicine, a new way of doing something, a new technology, and then New Jersey will benefit. But if we're basically saying you got to do all these HR, all this environmental stuff, and all these hurdles that actually aren't necessarily making our environment safer or our employees safer, what are you doing it? You're just checking boxes and you're doing paperwork. We got to move away from that mentality. We got to get away from that compliance mentality more. How do we support businesses? And my worry is that I don't think we focus on that enough.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see what happens. Chris Emigholz, great job today and continued great work in Trenton.
Thank you very much, Bob.
All right, we'll be back right after these words.
you're first. First to respond. First to put others' lives before your own. And in an emergency, you need a network that puts you first, that connects you to technology and each other, that's built with and for first responders. FirstNet, the only officially authorized wireless network for first responders. Because putting you first is our job.
Okay, at AT&T, everyone gets our best deals on all smartphones.
Let me break it down. You got your new customers.
They get our best deals.
You got your existing customers.
They also get our best deals. Everyone gets the deals.
Questions?
Got it. But why did you use a permanent marker?
Because I want to make sure you remember.
I'm gonna get a new whiteboard.
It's not complicated. Only AT&T gives everyone our best deals on every smartphone, like the Samsung Galaxy S21 5G for free.
Welcome back to NJBIA's Mind Your Business. I'm Bob Considine. Well, on the heels of NJBIA's recently released Business Outlook Survey, NJBIA also hosted its annual Public Policy Forum. We now take you through a panel discussion on the affordability challenges confronting New Jersey businesses, featuring Trenton's top legislative leaders and co-moderated by New Jersey 101.5 anchor Eric Scott and NJBIA President and CEO Michele Siekerka. Have a look at this very engaging conversation from NJBIA's Public Policy Forum.
So Speaker Coughlin mentioned the UI fund. How many in this room came here hoping to hear something about the UI fund and potential relief? So you mentioned that you had taken action in the Assembly on that. Did not get action in the Senate. Senator Sarlo, what happened?
Piggyback on the UI fund, clearly it moved to the Assembly, it moved to my committee as the chairman of the Senate Budget Appropriations Committee, working with Senator Oroho. We had moved it out through the committee. A little disappointed when it did get to the floor of the Senate, and there was feedback from the administration that they wanted to put the brakes on it at that point in time and would not sign it. So I think there was take a step back. Clearly, it's something that we need to revisit. There's two things we need to revisit. That, we talk about affordability, right? As the speaker says, we can't stop working on affordability issues, right? We have to continue to work on them. But there's two areas where I think where we could work with all of you, is on the UI fund. And number two is when this corporate business tax surcharge comes up in 2023, we must allow it to sunset. We must allow it to sunset. And I'm going to be very vocal about that in the legislative process. So those are two areas that we have some work to do, and hopefully we could do it in a bipartisan manner. And then the third piece for me is something that I think we all get frustrated with, is over-regulations, and now I'm putting my hat on as an outside of a legislator, but as a CEO of a large company, is over-regulations by DEP, DCA, and some of these agencies that feel compelled sometimes to regulate without the legislature even acting on some of these things. So we need to do more oversight on state agencies who feel the need to over-regulate.
Well, it is unlikely, history would show, that you're actually going to see a reduction in spending in any appreciable way. Once the budget goes up, it very rarely comes down. But we do have the Senate Budget Chairman here. We have the Assembly Speaker here. I would assume that at least some preliminary conversations have been had about spending in the new budget. What is the appetite in your houses for the potential of a tax increase, either broadly or selectively as individual revenue raisers to sustain that level of spending?
Well, look, we are constantly mindful of spending. It is one of the challenges that we face year in and year out. And we'll continue to do that this year. The budget chairs of both the Assembly and the Senate talk together. The Senate President and the Governor and I speak all the time about how we're going to raise it. To the first question you asked, can we do it without increasing spending next year, without increasing in taxes? But if history is any indication, the answer is yes. I mean, we didn't last year. There were no increases in fees, no increases in taxes. I'm not really sure that there was an awful lot of new programs either, John, to your point. But I know what was in the budget. And what was in the budget, and while there is spending and while there is surplus, the surplus is good. I don't think there's anybody here who runs a business that would operate their business with no surplus at all, nothing to be prepared for a rainy day. And I know that that's true because we've had 3 upgrades in our bond rating, and that's a reflection of having good, stable a source of revenue, a good stable reserve, and doing the things that were included that had helped, drove up some of the spending, like addressing the pension plan, which we had ignored for too long, right? We made additional payments on the pension plan. We've made our full payment now for the second, we'll make it again this year for the second or third time in a row. Something that hadn't been done, had been ignored for years. So yeah, you can keep spending that. If you just can, pay the minimum on your credit card debt, that's probably one way of managing your finances. There's better ways, and so we did that. One of the things I think probably people don't realize is about 48% of the state's budget goes to property tax relief in one form or another. $18 billion for education, $5 billion for infrastructure, $2 billion in other tax relief programs. So that kind of spending, I would argue, is good spending. We're doing what we can to reduce property taxes, taking the burden off of people who have to struggle through and are first the challenges of inflation, and now first the challenges of the pandemic, and now the challenges of the pandemic. Trying to make people's lives a little bit easier, get them through these tough times, I would argue, is a good way to spend our collective money, because we are all in this together. We've also spent money on infrastructure, as I said. We've spent it on transit. We've spent it on, helping small businesses through the pandemic. So if you want to eliminate all kinds of spending, we can. But I would submit that we're better off by taking advantage of the opportunities we had. We've had good, strong revenue streams. We had money from the federal government. We borrowed money because we didn't know what the projection was. I mean, it's easy to look back now and say, well, gee, you didn't need that much. Well, at the time, we didn't know what was going to happen, right? You don't get to make the decision looking back. You get to make it guessing forward. And so, sure, do we always look for ways to reduce spending? We do. Do we look for ways to control spending in addition to that? For sure. I'm fairly conservative in terms of allowing bills to go up that spend money in the middle of the year. I think we should focus on that. So, as with everything, there's constant work to be done, and constant work that's being done.
So if we just stay on spending for a moment, because I don't disagree on good spending when we have the cash to do it, especially our pension obligations, promises made, promises kept. But we have to remind ourselves that, we're flush with cash for reasons, as you said. We had money from the federal government. We're also the only state in the nation to have borrowed during COVID, $4.4
We're not the only
million.
state to borrow money. I don't know if we're the only state to borrow 4.4, but other states borrow money as well.
And at the time, we knew that.
And by the way, we've done an awful lot of debt defeasement as well.
So I want to go to debt, and that's exactly where I was going to go, because I do believe in good investment, but we have a whole other side of the balance sheet. Where's Walter? He loves to talk about debt, right, Walter? Right. Senator Oroho loves to talk about debt as well, and we do have some legislation coming up around transparency and debt. But can we talk about the debt factor and how we're going to address our increased debt and what we are doing to defease that debt going forward? Because that is a significant part of our budget.
If I may take, the one thing we have to look at, I'll keep the idea, we haven't talked anything really about, you all know, you got to focus on your cost drivers. And quite frankly, we haven't. And when the whole SALT thing went in, we did a bipartisan, basis report. It's still out there. It's something that we should put in. It recommended a new modernized, pension plan. We're trying to deal with, past mistakes and fund the pension plan, but we need a new modernized, pension plan, particularly for obviously our new employees and whatnot. Also, we're looking at our health plans. We all know it's going up 23-24%. We also had the idea of, the idea of K-12 education, school districts and everything. So if we don't focus on the cost drivers, we're going to keep continuing to get the same thing. And the other thing is, and as Senator Sarlo talked about, and we passed it in the legislature, and we have to look at the whole thing of government, but we passed the government efficiency and regulatory review. It passed overwhelmingly in both the Assembly and the Senate, and it got vetoed. We should bring that back because, quite frankly, that's something, as the chairman had mentioned, the regulations get passed on by the administrations, don't go through the legislature, and quite frankly, that government efficiency and regulatory review gives the businesses and many other kinds of constituencies the ability to come and talk. And it was going to be
chaired by the Chief Innovation Officer of the administration. So I think that's something that's the idea of focusing on our cost structure and our activities of what we have, something you guys have done for years.
Last year there was no appetite for tax increases or fee increases, and I'm 100% confident there's no appetite in the legislature this year for any fee increases or tax increases. So kind of put people at ease on that piece. With regards to the debt defeasance, I think, you know, the speaker touched upon all the good things that we've done, which does sometimes increase spending, you know, whether it's property tax relief or investment in education, infrastructure. But we did hit the pause button a little bit here. We have the federal dollars, we have the debt defeasance fund, we have a couple $1 billion that are sitting there. I've walked in this room, probably 20 people grabbed me, when we're gonna have a joint budget oversight committee start spending some of those dollars. So it's so funny, right? Everybody, so how are we gonna start spending that money? Well, I think with what's going on and around the country and around the world, some of the national implications with the war in Ukraine and energy dependence and inflation, hitting the pause button wasn't the worst thing, because we're going to take a look. We're going to be ready from this national implications as it steamrolls down into the states to cushion ourselves, so we don't have to increase taxes. And we'll take a hard look at the two areas: more investment, and at the same time reducing debt. Those are the two areas, and we'll consider the UI fund, and we got to look at this healthcare increase. You know, those are, in my eyes, those are the areas: investment in infrastructure, debt defeasance. We have to take a look at this healthcare impact and the UI fund. So we did hit the pause button a little bit, but we have a significant amount of surplus. In all the years I've been there, 2 to 3, 4 credit upgrades. That's a good thing. It puts us in a very, very strong position going forward.
Well, you had mentioned, you know, that a lot of that regulation comes from the administration. And I would have liked to have asked this question when the Democratic leadership was in the room, but do you feel you have a better, as the minority party, do you feel you have a better working relationship with the leadership of your individual houses than you do with the Murphy administration when it comes to communicating on things like regulation, when it comes to energy plans, when it comes to dealing with budget issues? Is there an open line of communication between the legislature and the administration?
There is, but even the Democrats can't get the governor to go along with things that really need to be done. I mean, it seems like this governor, this administration has become all powerful, and the majority party has allowed that to happen. I mean, I watch stuff that happens internally. So we're trying to get an intersection improvement done or something. DEP throws roadblocks on DOT. So there's this problem of overregulation within even our own administrations. And if you were in DEP, you know this, but this is not just this governor. This has gone on for a long time, where you have these competing egos and people that are buried in the bowels of Trenton that are fighting their fight on who's right, one-upsmanship. So if you can imagine how bad it is for you, it's happening within the administration. And I know, you'd like to just go there if you're governor and say, knock it off, guys. We got to get things moving. We need to get these projects done. We need to put people to work. We need to fix these bridges. There's things we need to do. And a lot of it's held up even for the state. And you see the Labor Department interfering with the natural flow of business. There are subcontractors for paving companies that own their own trucks, and they want to call those employees. Well, the definition of employee, typically you give them the desk, you give them the supplies, and they show up at your workplace or from home now, and they're your employee. But somebody owns the equipment, maybe multiple trucks, they're not an employee. So, I mean, this is another thing that's coming down the pike. I just want to know what the state DOT is going to do with their subcontract plow trucks and what they're going to consider them now. But no, they'll give themselves an exemption. So there's just so much in regulation that's a mess in Trenton. It needs to be torn down and started over. And the legislature should step up with the help of the majority, we need it, and say, we're going to direct some things. We're going to pass bills, Governor. And there's 120 of us, and there's one of you, and we're co-equal. But we don't have the cooperation from enough votes.
All right, a special thank you to our legislative leaders and moderators for their participation in NJBIA's Public Policy Forum And we thank you for joining us on NJBIA's Minding Your Business. See you next week.